But yeah, it wasn't easy, I have to say. And talk about mental resilience. I completely understand, and it's almost quite a good thing because it makes you understand how other people feel with mental health, etc. Which I probably zoomed through life doing up and down, but not badly. But yeah, going right down to those depths was hard. But then then it makes it better later on, and you find out more about yourself. But yeah, there were a lot of tears and that sort of thing. But it's but you get yourself up and you think, right, what am I going to do now?
We are back recording an episode during parliamentary recess with a member of parliament, and it's no surprise I'm back with a former member of the intelligence corps. I think I'm almost adopting a bit of a Pokemon approach because I've got to catch them all, I think. And so having recorded with Bob Seeley, Tom Tugendhat and Sarah Atherton, I'm delighted to introduce to Veterans in Politics, Flick Drummond MP. How's recess working out for you at the moment, Flick?
It's going well. I'm working for the first 2 weeks, and then I'm about to go off on holiday. So just trying to cram everything in before I go away.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's been a bit busy in politics of late, so I think we shouldn't overlook the fact that the elected representatives do need a holiday. So I hope you have a good time on that and well rested before you then come back. And by the time we release this episode, you will be back in Parliament, of course. But as with everything, Flick, we like to sort of go back to our guests' military roots, and I've already kind of given it away a little bit and mentioned the intelligence corps. But tell us a little bit about your military past, why you joined, what it taught you, and perhaps the highlights of that time in the Army Reserves.
Okay, so I've always been interested in the military anyway. My father was in the army, my grandfather was in the army. And so when I started working in London after I left university, I didn't do it at university, actually, the ATC, because I went to Hull University and they didn't do it there. We had to travel to Leeds. And I also was very sporty, so I played netball and lacrosse for the university teams. And so I didn't do it there, but I really regret that. But so when I got to London to work, I joined the intelligence corps, as you said, the TA, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's very hard work, every other weekend, every Wednesday, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I went down to Ashford. They're not in Ashford anymore, sadly.
No, that's my hometown as well.
Yeah, and Handel Street. And then I think it's in Finchley. We had once I passed out. The great thing about the intelligence corps as reservists, though, is that we passed out with the regulars and we're treated as one of the regulars. So instead of going as a group, which some other regiments do, they go as a TA group and do their bit. In the intelligence corps, we replaced regulars. They had to go on holiday, so we went to replace them, and that was really good. You felt very much integrated and part of the corps, and so it was a fabulous corps to be in.
I think that's a fair observation, actually, because from my own experience, having mobilised as an intelligence corps reservist for a couple of years or so, I think the phrase is individual augmentee, and it happens day in, day out. On the home base here in London, individuals going in and working alongside government, obviously famously during COVID-19, lots of intelligence corps reservists mobilised for that effort. But you're right. And still today, where occasionally, I think most corps days, there's a pass out, which is a joint pass out parade of regulars and reservists. And it is a busy life and you have to balance it. How did you find balancing that kind of work life and reservist balance, as well as social life, of course?
Well, I have to say, I used to come back on Sunday afternoon absolutely knackered. I used to be in bed by 6 o'clock, I think, so to face the working week. But it was great, and met some fantastic people. I had to leave because I got married and got pregnant quite quickly. And in those days, I could have gone back later on, but I had 4 children in 5 years, so it was pretty relentless. And there wasn't a lot of time to do anything else. But and then perhaps I should have gone back later on. But it was, 3 years of just amazing learning and meeting incredible people. So I always recommended any young people that I talk to. I always say, go and join the reserves. It's great fun.
Yeah, and the Int Corps Reserves is a great place to be now with 4 battalions right across the UK.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do recommend it any young person or any someone later on as well in life to have a go. And but in terms of your civilian background, you've got a strong background in education, and
Yeah.
as a parent, I'm really interested, and we're hearing lots of noise now from the political parties as they start to formulate manifestos, start to get ideas around there. Education is always a hot topic. Most famously, Tony Blair said, education, education, education. So I know for me, and other parents in particular, I've got a 3-year-old, we're now looking fast approaching school age. So education is probably going to be one of the things that I'm going to be looking at voting on specifically in the upcoming general election. Looking back, where do you think parties have got it right? And perhaps looking forward, and from what you're hearing and the noise, what do you think we're going to be campaigning on in terms of policy towards education to the next general election? Bit of a deep question.
This is really interesting. So I worked as an Ofsted inspector in the 90s, and then we went to America for a few years. And when I came back, they didn't have lay inspectors anymore. So, but I got into politics because I wanted to change the education system. I just didn't think it was good enough. But that was in the 90s, and it has started to improve. But I think we then need to go to the next step. So during COVID, I wrote a policy document, which was for the One Nation Conservatives. And I was looking at why do we still need GCSEs if we're expecting people to stay in education till they're 18? Why are we continuously testing young people? And it seemed to me that the curriculum then, I've looked at the curriculum and I thought, well, they're sort of we've brought in T levels, we've got A levels, we've got BTECs, and it's a bit of a mishmash. And in other countries, they don't test at 16. So why don't we come out with a sort of portfolio at 18 with both academic, technical, vocational qualifications, all treated as the same, and you'd come out with a portfolio which then you could show employers. And then interestingly, last year, there were about 7 commissions coming out with very much the same ideas as well, particularly the Times Commission. The NEU also had a commission too, and they all came out with very much similar findings. And so we're just about to launch a report from the all-party group we've called it Schools Learning and Assessment, and this all-party group is going to talk about that very much thing, and we're hoping to get that report into every single manifesto. It's not particularly taken on by the Department for Education at the moment, although I know the Prime Minister was very excited about the Times Commission, so I have great hopes that he might look at it. And it'll be interesting to see over the next few months what the different parties, including my own party, come up with as to how they're going to change it, because it really isn't fit for purpose at the moment. You've got about a third of young people don't pass their English or Maths GCSE, and then they have to retake it over and over again. So why are we making them do that? Why aren't we doing courses which actually engage them all the way through to 18? And I do think we should do Maths to 18. I think that's absolutely right. But we're not talking about A-level Maths, we're talking about functioning Maths, we're talking about applied Maths, we're talking about Maths which you're going to need for a potential career or for your life as well. So there are all these things that we're thinking about.
You mentioned
sorry, I've talked for too long there.
No, it's fascinating. And you mentioned the all-party parliamentary group. Do you sort of want to expand a little bit about the role of that and how that actually can influence policy, all parties, manifestos, governments, etc.?
Yeah, there are lots of all-party parliamentary groups on a whole range of subjects. And some of them are for information and some of them for sort of lobbying or policy, trying to change policy. So I'm on quite a few of them. But this one, I work with the Labour MP, Emma Hardy, who used to be a primary school teacher. And we've worked, the NEU are doing the secretariat, so they're helping us with this, and they've got an academic to help write the report, and we've just seen the first draft of it, and I've put lots of ideas back into it. It doesn't matter which party does it, we have to try and change things so that everybody feels included and that we're providing a really skilled and educated workforce for the future. When things change, as they have done with technology, we then have to make sure that we're educated to be able to take that on. Trying to, instead of just cramming yourself for exams, you've got to learn how to apply your information, how to get your information, how to then put it into the workplace or to whatever you want do. So, those are really important too. And I think the government's done a lot of work on that. So there are lots of different ways of getting into the workplace now, but we've got to make sure that we have the skills to do that.
And I think what you've just beautifully explained there is the importance of different people with different backgrounds in politics. So you mentioned your own background as an offset inspector and your expertise in education, primary school teachers, because too often we hear about the image of politicians. I think there's a high proportion of those that have been kind of through the special advisor route. I think about 18% of parliament. It's too many. You need some, but not that amount. But having people of your background that really get into the weeds, working with exterior organizations to come up with positioning and interesting ideas that can influence how our children are taught, in this case, I think is really important. More diverse backgrounds, professional backgrounds is really important too.
And it's the same with teachers too. We do need people coming in later into teaching as well, who've had experience in other careers as well. That's so important, particularly with secondary school, because they have, they can then explain how different careers, work for the pupils, rather than going from school to teacher training college or university and then back into school again. Really trying to encourage older people to go back into teaching. And I do think that older people need to go into politics as well, whatever age you are. You've just got something to offer, but older people in particular have that experience which you can bring into the political world.
I couldn't agree with you anymore on that point. And we have a bit of a cultural weirdness when it comes to older people in politics. If you look at the amount of former prime ministers that are still young really, and aren't in politics, they disappear. Whereas in the States, they believe in the great comeback.
Exactly. Yeah.
We need to change that and right down into our education. You're probably talking to someone that probably would have liked to have been a teacher, but I managed to get my kicks through military instruction and being a coach and a trainer of recruits. So I kind of got that kick and that giving back and that mentorship very much so. But we need to change the way that we look at those coming into our politics and not writing off older people. It's something I'm banging on about on a daily basis. And I know my wife's really passionate about it. They certainly don't do that in the States.
Absolutely. In the States, you think about going to politics in your 40s and 50s when you've already achieved something in your other career. Whereas here we have this sort of, you've got to get young people in. We've got MPs. They've just elected a 25-year-old. We had a 21-year-old in 2015. And, politics is about, changing the country. And yes, you can do that. You need to have experience to be able to do that. I feel quite passionate about it. I'm one of the assessors for the Conservative Party and the next generation coming in. And I get terribly excited when I see the old people who've achieved huge amounts in their life already have now decided to come into politics. But it's not an easy profession, as I too well know.
Not easy at all. But in terms of your route into it, like many MPs, you started in local government first. And that gives you a really good foundation. I certainly, when I speak to veterans and reservists that talk to me about wanting to be MPs, I'm like, whoa, hang on a minute, stop. Why are you overlooking local government? That's where you can make a real impact in the community that you actually live in, where your family are, often with more say, more budgets, more influence. And I think it's really important that I always espouse over local politics, but the frustration I have is that all too often we do tend to get the same old people that are in local politics. And I'm keen to change that. I mean, how would you sell the prospect of standing up to serve again in your local community to any of our listeners?
Local politics is absolutely essential. I remember as a councillor in Winchester, just changing individuals' lives. There was one chap who was stuck on the third floor of his block of flats. There was no lift. He couldn't get down. And his wife had to carry him. And if he needed to go to hospital, so he never went out. And I managed to change it so he got to the ground floor flat. In the same block, but we moved him around and he completely transformed his life. It's little things like that as a local politician, and just being able to change your own community is fantastic, and to get to know what's going on in your community as well, because you're the first to know as a councillor. Things like, I remember putting some seat next to a bus stop because the old people had to stand. It's things like that. And at the same time, then you get to, so that was the city council, and then you get to county council, where quite often you're responsible for social services, you're responsible for children's services, you're looking after all those looked after children, making sure that they are safe and secure, the transport, etc. I mean, the county council has huge budgets too, as do unitary authorities. So there are lots and lots of ways of contributing, and particularly to your local community without having to go up and down to London. And you're absolutely right with the power. If you got onto a county council or a city council cabinet, you have far more power than any MP does, unless you're a government minister. You have the power to change, to do whatever you want with those massive amounts of money. As a backbencher, I have very, very little power. I can lobby, and I constantly lobby government ministers to try and get some money for my area or to change things. But you don't actually have that power, which you can have as a local councillor.
Oh, well, you started to sell it to me even. And I'm someone that's always worked behind the scenes, but hey, I've been quite open. One day I'd love to be a local councillor, I think. Because as you've just described there, the ability to change the communities you live in, for your family, for your neighbours. And I love the fact that you still remember those little stories of, and it's quite the small things that make a massive difference to people's lives. But if there was like a word or a phrase that you'd use as a selling point to someone thinking about local government, if there's maybe one word or one phrase, what would that be to any of our listeners thinking about local government in a positive way?
I think it's change your community, or contribute to your community. You said it just a minute ago. It is, but it's also that the thing I really liked is I knew what was going on in my community, and you were the first to know, or you could find out very quickly. And that's useful rather than saying, oh God, what's going on down the road? How am I going to find out? You would know already, and you would be able to change things if it wasn't going right. I mean, it's a fabulous job. I mean, being a politician is a very, very good job. It's tough, but the rewards are immense. They really are.
And when you do change things, it's all about those relationships you build, right?
Yes.
With community, but also with local government officers who are basically like the local civil service, right? I mean, how do you engage with local officers to affect change?
You do it with reasonableness, I think. If you start going in and attacking people, saying, I want this, I want that, I'm a councillor, you're not going to get anywhere. You have to, negotiate. I mean, somebody said, oh, you're far too nice to be a politician. Well, I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. You've got to work with people. You've got to encourage people. You've got to, understand where they're coming from as well. And then you find somewhere in the middle that you both agree on. So it's very important that, and also because they're not allowed to speak out, often officers either, because they're civil servants. And I thought it's the politicians that should take the blame, not the local civil servants. I'm really keen on that. Used to really annoy me when people would go on about local officials in public. That's totally not right, because they can't answer back. So politicians need to take the blame, and that's why we're there. We put ourselves up to take the blame as well, but we shouldn't be blaming local officers. It's up to us to change things behind the scenes and not make them the centre of attention.
Yeah. Oh, that annoys me when politicians do that, or to their staff even. You see it on social media. They kind of front up their staff as a bit of a shield between them, but no, take responsibility. It's really important. And that's what you learn in the armed forces, actually. I think you learn to take responsibility very quickly, very early on. You have to responsibility for your gun or your equipment, and nobody else is going to do it for you. And then you have to learn. And this is what I love about the military. You have to be a team player. And I think it's really important. I've always, I played a lot of sport. I've always been a team player. And people who aren't team players, it's really obvious, because they don't work with others. They don't understand, and they become quite isolated too. So the military is a brilliant, brilliant place for learning how to teamwork and working with a wide range of people, and getting things done, and how to inspire people as well. You see it from other people, and then, they become inspiring. So you take on some of their persona, because you understand that that's how it works. It's a fantastic training for life outside, that's for sure. Well, and that's why we do this podcast, of course, to inspire those to stand up and serve again. And you've listed some brilliant skills there and attributes of the armed forces community of why they will make and do make such brilliant local, national politicians as well.
Yeah.
But you've got the experience in politics as well. I think about 3 decades of experience of working in politics at various stages. I mean, looking at your CV, it's pretty extraordinary. You've lost a general election. You then served as an MP before marginally losing a seat in that snap election of 2017. And we spoke to Jason McCartney, an RAF veteran who experienced the loss too. But then you were selected as a parliamentary candidate and then as a police and crime commissioner candidate before then successfully being elected as an MP back into Westminster, only then to face reselection forced by the boundary review where your seat basically was split 4 ways. And then being selected for a new seat. I mean, where on earth do you get your political and personal resilience going through all of that?
Yes, well, even when I became a local councillor, it took me 3 times to get on as well. I lost twice and then got on the 3rd time. Because I'm so passionate about changing things, I think, as I say, it was always education that I wanted to change, and I haven't got there yet. I've written these policy papers, etc. They haven't been accepted by government. I've really got to get back in so that I can carry on doing that. And it's much easier to do it from the inside than it is from the outside. But also, I love just working with people, and madly, I love knocking on doors and talking to people and getting things done. And so I've kept going rather, and maybe I'm slightly crazy, I'm not sure. I stood in 2005 in Southampton, but that was one of those no hope seats that everybody's expected to do. And then I got selected in Portsmouth South about 2 months before the expenses scandal and all the safe seats came up for grabs. And Portsmouth South was going to be a marginal seat anyway. And 2010, it's a university city. So the Lib Dems offered them free tuition fees. So they all turned out to vote Lib Dem. Well, I suspect I would have done the same as a student too. I've never seen students queuing down the road to vote. So I knew pretty much that I would have lost that one. And then in 2015, so I carried on in Portsmouth South. I'd moved from Winchester to Portsmouth to be in the area. So, vast expense, as you can imagine. And so I did it. So in 2015, nobody offered them anything. And so we won by 5,000 votes. So that's probably the core, what, Portsmouth South should be without the university. And then in 2017, I should call the snap election, it was all going very well. And then suddenly we had that horrendous manifesto. God knows, we certainly weren't consulted on it. And the Labour Party offered students free tuition fees. So the students turned out and they queued down the streets. And the Labour Party got in by 1,700, I think it was. My vote went up, but we were still beaten. And then I went to work for the Police and Crime Commissioner for a bit as his deputy, but he decided that I was taking too much of the limelight, and so he didn't want me anymore, which was really sad. I have to say, losing your job twice in a year was really, really upsetting, and it's really depressing, particularly as I loved both of those jobs. So when they decided that actually we didn't want him anymore, I put my name forward and I was selected. But about 6 weeks later, Boris Johnson called the general election, and a week before nominations had to be in, the MP in Mearn Valley decided to step down. And because I'm really, I know the area extremely well, they asked if I would put my name forward. And I had, I think 4 hours to decide whether I wanted to carry on being the Police and Crime Commissioner candidate or not. But the reason why I got into politics was education, and the thought that I might be able to get in and carry on with that particular policy area was too much. So I said yes. I got selected, obviously got in, and now I'm really, really nearly there on the education reform. The Police and Crime Commissioner is an absolute fab job, but defence, foreign policy, and education are my real areas of interest. So it was, so I decided that I would put my name forward. And actually, we've got a brilliant Police and Crime Commissioner now who does a far better job, I'm sure, than I would have done. So, which is really good. And then I absolutely had an amazing 4 years. I do the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme. I've been doing that. I went to the Royal College of Defence Studies for a whole year, and that was during COVID, so I was able to do it pretty much full time. The Royal College of Defence Studies is just extraordinary, but unfortunately, I've set the bar so high that they have 4 MPs on every course. And now everybody goes and they say, well, Flick did it full time and her parliamentary stuff too. And they go, oh, okay. I set it rather too high, but I just loved it. I wrote all the essays, I did the strategy exercises and threw myself into it. And I've just finished doing the RAF bit of the Armed Forces scheme. And then next year I'm signed on for the Strategic Command, which I think would be very interesting. Although I'm not sure how much time I'm going to have, because obviously I'm now just been selected for Winchester nearly just over a week ago. And it's a much more marginal seat. So I'm going to have to work very, very hard on the doorstep to try and convince people to vote for me.
Wow. I mean, I've had to take a breath myself.
Madness.
What are the tools that you reach into? I mean, you're a parent as well. What depths you reach into in order to find that resilience to as you said, you lost your job twice in a year. We've all been there. I remember going for a job interview that I really dearly wanted. Funny enough, it was at a school. It was to run the combined cadet force. And I got in the final 2 and I didn't get, I remember it took me a while to process not getting the job. I mean, the guy that got it had run a CCF somewhere else before. So understand he was the better candidate, clearly. They would have had to have taken a bit of a punt on me. But I remember how I felt and the resilience that I had to then tap into to respond back. But what you've been through is on a different level. What kind of those personal attributes, skills, are the tools? You mentioned sport. Where on earth do you find that resilience?
It's been difficult, I have to say. Particularly losing in 2017, the general election was really hard because I'd only just got there after 2 years. And I did find it hard. I mean, I've got a great family, wonderful husband and children who is really so kind. But yeah, it wasn't easy, I have to say, and talk about mental resilience. I completely understand. And it's almost quite a good thing because it makes you understand how other people feel with, mental health, etc., which I probably zoomed through life doing, up and down, but not badly. But yeah, going right down to those depths was hard. But then it makes it better later on, and you find out more about yourself. But yeah, there were a lot of tears and and that sort of thing. But it's but you get yourself up and you think, right, what am I going to do now? And during that 2017 to 2019, I did some fantastic things. So I became the chair of the South East region for the Veterans Advisory and Pension Committee, so working with veterans, particularly on their pensions or on their, if they've been injured, trying to get their compensation schemes and everything sorted. And again, trying to make sure that, trying to change the VAPCs, that they just didn't concentrate on that, but the Armed Forces Covenant as well, and that they were the go-to people to identify where the Armed Forces Covenant was working and where it wasn't working. So that was great. I also got on the board of the National Citizen Service, which is something that David Cameron brought in for 16-year-olds for just after their GCSE, and it's sort of 3 weeks. No, 4 weeks, I think it was. I think they keep reducing it now because it's quite expensive. But the first week, young people go and they do sort of outward bound stuff. So really pushing them out of their comfort zones. And living in Portsmouth, where a lot of people have never been outside Portsmouth before, they've never travelled. So taking young people out, putting them into a camp down in Devon and jumping off cliffs and canoeing and all that sort of thing completely transforms lives. They come back and then they do sort of a week of cooking and financial management and all that sort of thing. Then they did a week of working out what social project they were going to do in their community, and then the final week they actually put that into place. So and it was really getting people from all bits of the community, from all different sorts of schools, all working together. It's absolutely brilliant. And so I did that for a bit. And then I also became the voluntary chair of the Conservative Policy Forum. So I packed quite a lot more in. I like to be busy, as you can tell. And so that really kept me going. And I've got a huge numbers of friends who look out for me as well. But it was difficult. So I completely understand how hard it is when people lose their jobs and find life difficult.
Yeah, that empathy now. I guess that's even more so strengthened your abilities to empathize with people, and which you, of course, you'll need when you're starting to negotiate with people about things that they're passionate about, like education. And I was listening to a podcast the other day. I think it was the Ian Dale and Jackie Smith politics podcast. For the Many podcast, which is brilliant. I do recommend it. And they were talking about electronic voting. And of course, we saw that happening during COVID. But then we have the lobby, and we get the word lobbying from people, and that comes from a physical place in Parliament. Is that a really important part of politics when you get locked in for votes and brushing up shoulders of the people that you need to grab hold of and get across your point? How does that all work?
It's really important. You can be really isolated in Parliament because we're all sitting in our offices. We have so much work to do, whether it's emails or Zoom meetings, and you may go for a whole day without seeing anybody. So actually arriving at 7 o'clock in the evening or 10 o'clock in the evening or whenever we vote, to catch up with friends, to find a minister, to talk to people is very, very important. And otherwise, you can, as I say, you feel very isolated. But when you get there and you feel like you're part of a team, a part of a group of people that are trying to change things, it makes it all worthwhile. And I think it is important because otherwise you could be anywhere and just pressing a button. People might not even be in Parliament then too. So it is important that we're there. And the ministers are great about turning up. The Prime Minister's there often, and they wait at the sort of front where we go in so that if anybody wants to speak to them. And just that little sort of 10 seconds, 20 seconds can make all the difference. You can ask a question really quickly of a minister and you get a quick response. And then that helps your constituents, so it is important.
Yeah, so electronic voting helps kept the functions of democracy going during COVID, but it can't beat that face-to-face piece. And I think that's what we've all learned in our lives as we, eased ourselves off of Zoom calls, and it's still part of our lives, in our working lives. But actually, you can't beat pressing the flesh and getting in front of someone and getting your point across. So all those things that you're so passionate about, and it really comes across when you're talking as well, by the way. One of the things that you also worked on was furthering the prospects of women into work. Now, I'm really lucky. I've had some really great, strong female role models in my life, from my grandmother to my grandmothers to my mum and my late sister, and now I'm a proud father of a little girl. So naturally, I'm very interested in the prospects of women as I look at my little girl. And you worked with Labour's Jess Phillips on setting up an APPG on women and work. Women in politics, it's really tough for you. From what we've seen, in the rough and tumble of British politics in particular, do you think that women get treated or targeted differently, whether that be on social media or in the press? And what's your own experience been like?
I think we do. We always judge on our appearance, which they don't. Men are so lucky. You can put a suit on and maybe a different color tie or, a white shirt, and you can get away with that day after day after day. We get judged on whether that jacket's nice or the wrong color for you, etc., or don't like your haircut. And you can see that over and over again in any article in a newspaper. So that already puts you at a bit of a disadvantage. And then you could be too shrill, or your voice doesn't work, etc. Again, or you're too aggressive. It's really, really difficult. So it's finding that fine line. And I've been watching the latest selections around the country, and they seem to be going to men again in the Conservative Party. So I hope that that's going to reverse shortly, because we are short of women in politics. And it's a brilliant job for women too, because we are the ones that, like to go and talk to people, with touchy-feely people. And it's a great job. And as far as women getting back into work later on, it's a brilliant career for women, as I said, for older women going back into the workplace as well. I was lucky, my children pretty much grown up by the time I've got into politics. And that is just makes it so easy. It's my time now. I can go out and spend the very, very long hours that politics takes to do the job. But yeah, and I think, I mean, I came off Twitter because I'd had enough, really, and it was no good for mental health. And also, people in Mearn Valley tend to not use Twitter anyway. And Facebook is it's a bit easier to use. You can block people, and that's very helpful as well. Although you do need, some criticism. You can take, criticism, but after a bit. But that's very much a learning process. And I suspect men have exactly the same issues with the flack that they get on social media. And I suspect that it hurts them just as much as it hurts women too. But I suppose the focus has been on women. But that women's APP, Women and Work APPG, has been really good. The first, I mean, I set it up and then I asked Jess to join because she's quite media savvy and I'm, not so media savvy. And it was great. Our first report was about older women returning to work because it's something really close to my heart. And the Chancellor, who was Philip Hammond in those days, gave 5 million, not to us, but to a project to have a look at how to encourage older women to get back into the workplace. Because we found that if you'd been out of the workplace for more than 6 months, it was very difficult to get a job, which is horrendous, really. But also, I'd like to have a much more flexible society so that people see time taken off for caring for children or for, your elderly is not seen as a negative or a gap in your CV. It's actually seen as a positive. And but that is getting there slowly, but it's up to senior managers to think, that is a good thing. So it's trying to change their attitude, really, to say that gap for 2 or 3 years or 5 years or whatever is not a negative, it's a positive because they've been bringing up a family and that's good for society and. So we're at the moment, we're doing a report. We're looking at each decade of a woman's life to see what's impacting on those decades and what we can do to change it or what we can do to help. So that's going to be quite interesting. We've just done the sort of teenage years and we're going on to the 20s. And if you think about both men and women's lives, actually, those different decades and how people go through life and what they do differently.
Yeah,
fascinating.
I think I might save my 20s for a different episode, but yeah, I've been fortunate as well to work with Women Returners, who are a great organisation getting women back into work, whether it be from maternity or older in late stage in their life. And this is a real life topic in our household. As my wife, as Margot has more time at nursery now with help from government, and also as she approaches school age, my wife is already starting to plan. But you're right, some of the things that she's done during being a mother, she's upskilled within a social media course she did through Social Media for Spouses, which is provided by BFBS, an amazing organization for military spouses. Just because the fact that she hasn't been full-time work, she's upskilled during that time, as well as everything you learn as a parent too. And some of the observations that we talk about this about women in the public eye, and it could be celebrities. Whenever they post a picture of a woman celebrity, straight away they go into their appearance. And we saw that in politics. Theresa May with her shoes, and how she spoke, and it's so depressing. And I think the more that we can do to platform our brilliant women in our politics. I'm lucky I'm married to one that's amazing. The best campaigner I know, I'm married to. And there's more we can platform. And I think it's our responsibility of this podcast. Obviously, we have a angle, which is the military angle. And we know women in the armed forces are brilliant. And as we start to see them rise to senior positions in our armed forces too, this is all part of this network for little girls like mine to see that and be inspired by that. And all of us have a responsibility, men and women, to challenge these behaviors when we see them, be it in the press. But certainly I'm not going to get involved in Twitter spats around it. That's for sure. That's just a toxic place to be.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, and I'm going to pick up on the woman front, my little girl, as she gets older, what would you say to her to encourage her to do something with a life in public life, perhaps to, or for any of our listeners about standing up to serve again in public life?
Well, firstly, don't give up, which has obviously been my mantra. No, I think if you've got something that you really want to achieve, you need to go for it and just follow it and do whatever you can to get there. Because once you've got there, it is a fantastic job. It really, really is. Whether it's local councillor, or being a PCC, for instance, or being an MP, it's a great job, brilliant job for a woman. But it is a hard journey. Some people don't. Some people just go straight in, actually, to tell you the truth. But I've just had a tough time, and but just don't give up. And it really is easy to give up in politics. A lot of people just think, oh well, why am I bothering? It's the flack is too much. I'm getting too much negative stuff. Just ignore that, and if you really, really want to do it, you can do it.
On those wise words, don't give up. Flick Drummond MP, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johnny.
Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.